Hello, everyone. Greetings. This is Makia Majrashi from Saudi Patient Safety Center. Thank you for your time joining our webinar today. I know with this today catchy title, you are going to have a lot of questions. Don't worry. You will be engaged with some reflections, and we need your interactions and feelings to be with us. You might also post your Q&A icon at the end of the session, and our speaker will be answering them gladly. You will be hearing a presentation from Dr. Diane Opin. She's a consultant, patient safety and wellness in Healthcare Canada. Dr. Diane Opin, she is a PhD. She is a health system researcher and independent consultant whose work focuses on emotional impact of errors on health care workers. She is also currently working with Healthcare Excellence Canada on a project to help patients and healthcare workers heal together after harm. And she is also a collaborator for the Shame and Medicine Interdisciplinary Research Project UK and WillDoc Alberta. Now, moving along to our session, please join me to welcome Dr. Diane Opin. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Makia. And thank you, everyone, for being here today and giving me an opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts and some of my experience about healing after harm. And thank you also to the Saudi Patient Safety Center for inviting me today. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. So as a start, I just want to go through what I hope to achieve during the session and that I hope you will want to achieve during the session. We are going to examine together, you are going to examine your emotions and reactions to unintended harm. And we're going to talk about what those are and why you feel them. And I will explain unintended harm in a moment. We'll talk a little bit about shame, the impact of shame on healthcare workers, especially those who blame themselves for what happened. I will also outline how to shift the focus away from blame, whether it's blaming yourself or others blaming you, towards a psychologically safe culture. I hope that I expect that that is a term that you've seen before. I want to help you and organizations formulate a strategy to cope with and heal from this tremendous emotional impact. And finally, we'll talk about lessons learned and some stories that I have with some of the research and people I've known, and go through the recommendations again at the end. So hopefully that's what you're here for, and hopefully we can accomplish this in the very short time. The presentation itself will leave lots of time, will be short enough so that we'll have lots of time at the end for questions and comments. And as I'm speaking, if you hear a whirring in the background, that is our snow removal people. We had a big snowstorm last night, so apologies if you hear a rumbling in the background. That's the reality in Canada. So I want to start now to say a word about words. And as you are, I'm sure, aware, there are many words to describe what you might call a medical error. So when something goes wrong and a patient is harmed, and so you might have heard the term patient safety incident. That is the term that the WHO is currently using to describe what essentially is a medical error. But we don't like to use medical error, and I'll explain a little bit more later, because it insinuates that somebody is to blame for the mistake. So rather, we don't call it an error. We call it a patient safety incident. The other word you may have heard is adverse event or system error. We'll talk to you a little bit more about system error, but basically it's not an individual who made the error, it's part of the whole system that things went wrong. A whole bunch of things happened, many things happened along the way for the harm to come to the patient. Preventable harm, you might have heard that term, but to me that implies that this could have been prevented, and therefore somebody was negligent, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when things go wrong, and there are many reasons for that to go wrong. I also don't like preventable harm because there are very, very few errors, in my opinion, where it was preventable. You could see it coming. You knew it was about to happen, and therefore you want to fix it. In hindsight, it's often preventable. You think it might have been preventable. So that's another term. Mistake, of course, and unexpected harm. You didn't expect the harm to happen. That's another term. And unintended harm. So this unintended harm is actually the term just for today. These are all words that describe medical error, but for today we're going to use, I'm going to use, when I refer to what might be patient safety incident, a medical error, mistake, adverse event, I'm going to use unintended harm. And so our definition for today, just so we're all clear what it is we're talking about, is an event which results in unintended harm to the patient. So it's an event. We're not talking about necessarily a big mistake somebody made, but it's something went wrong and it resulted in unintended harm to the patient. So we're not talking about the harm that a patient might receive because of surgery. They have to be cut open to do the surgery. We're not talking about that harm. And we're not talking about the patient's underlying medical condition where the condition itself might harm them. So we're talking about something outside of that. So an event which results in unintended harm to the patient. So when I say unintended harm, use the word that most resonates with you. If you think mistake, medical error, adverse event, then put that in the back of your mind whenever I say unintended harm. Okay. Trying not to talk too quickly so that I'm clear. So this is a time when I'd like, Makia mentioned that we're going to have some time for interactivity. This is a time for you to reflect on a time when one of your patients experienced this unintended harm. So you were part of a situation where a patient was harmed due to circumstances that you weren't planning. So in the back of your mind, think, oh, when there was a medical error, system error, but whenever they experienced unintended harm and you were part of that. So what did you feel at the time? And it could be you felt something emotionally, psychologically, or even physically. You felt something. What is it you felt? And Makia is going to invite you to put your, whatever you like, a word or two, just a word or two in the chat, and she will read them back to you. So Makia, you want to give more instructions about that?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Diane. Actually, we are really eager to hear from you how are those reflections could engage your feelings. So we have one answer, Dr. Diane, guilty. So what else? We want to hear more. Are you able to see the chat, Dr. Diane?
No, I was hoping that you would be able to share with me what you're hearing, what you're reading.
Okay.
I don't see the chat.
So our participant, we need to hear more of your feelings. How did you feel at the time that you were engaged with patient psychologically.
Yeah. So when there was harm, when there was an error, you know, maybe you felt, you blamed yourself. Somebody said, yes, you felt guilty. Are the answers coming in, Makia?
Yeah.
And everybody, where? Go ahead.
Disappointed.
Very good.
Shame. Depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Guilty again. Angry and depression.
Interesting.
Dishonest to work. Denial.
Yeah.
How do you think? Fear of patient trust. I think they mean fear of losing patient trust.
Yep, I understood that, yeah.
Dissatisfaction. I like your interactions. Thank you. Our participants are really engaging, so active. Blaming
Good.
and think that you can prevent. Okay. Guilty that makes one depressed and psychologically losing trust from patients. Another reflection from Erica, sad and want to correct mistake immediately. Regret. So we have a mix.
Yeah. Okay, you'll have an opportunity at the end too to reflect. You'll have an opportunity again to reflect. But yes, some of these reflections that you have are very expected, and you know, it's you probably see as people are sharing that, oh yes, that's what I feel. So this exercise is really to show you that you're not alone in feeling some of these things. Guilt is big. Shame. I like it. Somebody said denial, and that's whether it's somebody else denying that they're part of it, or you feel yourself, no, I didn't do anything wrong. You know, the first reaction is, I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done that. The trust from the patients, that's very big. You have a good relationship with your patients. You want them to trust you. You want them to, you know, you want to care for them, and suddenly they can't trust you anymore. That's what you feel. And you feel, oh, if only I could have prevented this. You know, is there a way I could have prevented this? So those are all really, really good suggestions. And they're very common, as I said. When I did, in one of my studies, I asked participants to share what they felt. And they were talking very specifically about where there was unintended harm and they blamed themselves. So sometimes they blame themselves, even though it may not have been entirely their fault, but they felt very deeply that they blamed themselves. So a word that comes up a lot too is, I was ashamed of being stupid enough. So that's a very, very degrading word. I was stupid enough to make a mistake like that. So shame and feeling stupid. It almost feels like you failed as a person. So it's not that you did this one action and that action was bad. Suddenly you are a failure as a person. It's a very, very deep emotions. And I mentioned physically, we didn't get into that in the chat, but often, you know, when you think of something happens, you go, oh, you just want to run away, and you're your face gets red and your heart is pounding. And she says, it's a very visceral fight or flight kind of reaction that just pounds you. My heart leapt, you know, that feeling of leaping into your stomach and into your throat. So those are common reactions to feel. So thank you for sharing. So I am going to talk a little bit about the emotion of shame and guilt as well, because we talked about guilt, and I talk about the difference between the two. So because shame is a very big part of patient safety incidents or unintended harm, let's talk a little bit about shame. So shame is what we feel when we believe we have failed to meet our own standard, goal, or rule. So we've failed to meet a standard. So we have standards for ourselves, whether it's as a parent, as a player on a soccer team, or as a healthcare worker. So you have a certain standard for yourselves. And the standard you probably have is to take good care of your patients, to treat them well, to make them better when they come to your office or hospital or long-term care facility. So you want that is your standard, to take good care. And when you don't meet that standard, suddenly as a person, you feel shame. You feel, oh my goodness, I have failed as a person. So it's not necessarily I have failed at this particular action, but you feel ashamed that you haven't met your standard. And the difference between shame and guilt, and you might have already caught on to this, shame is when you say, I am bad. I am a bad nurse. I am a bad pharmacist. I am a bad doctor. I am a bad manager, rather than I did a bad thing. So shame encompasses your whole being. It's not just about, oh, I feel guilty that I forgot to give her that med and she got sick, or I feel bad that I didn't see that prognosis right away. I should have picked up on that. No, it's, oh, I am so stupid, or I feel so stupid as a doctor. I don't deserve to be a doctor, and I'm a bad person. So that's shame. So it's a much deeper feeling, and it's actually one of the most intense feelings that you can feel. So Brene Brown, you may have heard of her, very well-spoken individual. An intensely painful feeling, so it's very deep, or experience of believing we are flawed, so there's something wrong with us, and therefore unworthy of acceptance or belonging. So I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be part of this team. And it is one of the most powerful, painful, and potentially destructive experiences known to humans. So these are old quotes, but they are effective quotes. So it is a very deep feeling. And you may not have felt that deeply, shame. Maybe you haven't gone through this kind of experience, but your colleagues may have, and you may have seen that in your colleagues. So that's a little bit about shame. And I want to talk about what it does to you as a person. And shame, what it does is it erodes you from within. And what I mean by that is, as a healthcare worker, you walk around with this mask of infallibility. So you have to believe in yourself, and you have to make others, especially your patients, believe you know what you're doing. You come into a room and you don't say, oh, I am Diane, I'm your nurse for today. I'd like to, don't worry, we're going to take care of you. We're going to make you better. You're going to feel better. We're going to help you get better. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. So that's what you want to do when you walk in a room. You don't want to walk in a room and say, hi, I'm Diane. We're not really sure what's going on here, and we hope that what we do to treat you is going to work, but it's not sure. We're never really sure about this. No, you have to build that trust, the trust that somebody mentioned earlier. You want to build that trust in a person. So even though inside you maybe are not sure and you're hoping you're doing the right thing, you have to show that you know what you're doing. So when something happens, when a mistake happens, or something goes wrong, unexpected harm, suddenly that mask begins to erode from within. And what I mean is suddenly you're exposed and unmasked. And inside, your self-esteem is eroded. You start feeling filled with self-doubt. You're going to criticize yourself. Oh, you're so stupid. What were you thinking? What were you thinking? Don't you know any better? And then you experience some irrational thinking. And I've got some quotes here. Some of the things that you might think is, I must be perfect. I shouldn't have made that mistake. If I make a mistake, people will respect me less and trust me less. So immediately you think people are going to respect you less. When you've been working for 20 years and so far things have gone really well and you've saved many, many lives, but people are going to respect you less just because of this one thing that happened. That's irrational thinking. I am the only one responsible for this mistake. Now that again is irrational thinking, because often it is very many people involved in the care of the patient and so many things could have gone wrong along the way. This is a catastrophe, something that can never be fixed. And, yeah, sometimes it is, but most often it's not a catastrophe. That's called catastrophizing. And then we second guess ourselves. Did I really do that? That denial that somebody talked about earlier. Was that, did I do that? Or, oh, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I did hear the doctor wrong, even though maybe it was the doctor who got the dosage wrong. And of course, you feel that great remorse. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, having remorse, just feeling so badly. So that shame, all those things are eroding your mask from the inside. And what happens is that suddenly you lose your confidence. You think, I can't work today. I can't continue working because, look what I did. I can't go on. You feel helpless because often, well, as healthcare workers, my experience with healthcare workers is that you always want to fix things, find a solution. That's the nature of your job. But suddenly you can't fix this. And so you feel helpless. The other thing that shame will do is make you want to withdraw from others. And you see in this photo where a nurse or doctor is looking down and thinking and trying to hide himself and withdraw and say, I don't want to see anybody. I'm so ashamed. I feel so bad. I just want to, that's your first instinct, is to hide away and withdraw from others. You feel inadequate, and you have those physical reactions I was talking about. It can amount to distress that can go over several days. And of course, we've heard in some situations where individuals who feel they blame themselves eventually take their own lives, which we don't want that. We want to do everything possible to avoid that. And PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is the case where you may think you've dealt with your issue, you've dealt with this, and you've moved on from it, but then a few years later, something happens and it all comes back to you. And this, I wanted to tell a story about one of the physicians I spoke to who was talking to me about an experience where he experienced unintended harm to a patient. And so he was, and I'll just read a little bit of the story. He was treating a baby in the emergency department. He had suspicions about the prognosis, and he was, he was a junior staff at the time. He asked a senior staff member their opinion, and they advised this physician resident to send the baby home. And he still wasn't sure it was the right thing to do, but he put his doubts aside and followed the advice of his supervisor. So sent the baby home. In the end, the baby obstructed and died at home. And here's what he said. And you go back in retrospect and you say, I should have pushed harder. I had a feeling in my gut that this was the way to go, and I got intimidated by the other consultant's stature and experience. So I backed down. And then he talks about later on, and he says, so when someone dies or when someone is left significantly injured, I think that's the kind of thing that stays with you forever. And then it just pops up, at a grocery store, and then a song on the radio or whatever. And you get back to thinking about that patient or that situation. And when you go back there, it's that shame and guilt that come back. I think probably the guilt gets better over time. It's still always there. I think you feel less inclined to self-flagellate. Now that's a big word. He feels like he is self-flagellating, so hitting himself with a whip on his back. So that's the word he used. You feel less inclined to self-flagellate, so to speak. But then it's just a constant reminder. You remember their face. You remember their parents. You remember the hospital. And he started getting very emotional and crying at this point. It's that salient. It's forever ingrained in your mind. I guess most people are able to get over it and continue to deal with it. But I think it's easy to see how someone who's not coped with it, or maybe more sensitive, can be just overwhelmed and not be able to get over it. So that's a pretty intense emotion that this individual was feeling. I wanted to share that with you. So stop listening to me for a while, and we're going to take a moment again to reflect, and Makia will read your answers. So get ready to provide some reflections in the chat. This is, why do you think you and your colleagues are so hard on yourselves? Why do you think you and your colleagues are so hard on yourselves, especially when things go wrong? Why do you think you are, people like that physician are self-flagellating or feeling so badly? Why do you think that is? In a few words, 1 or 2 words. So if you can start putting your answers in, and Makia, I'll let you start to read them out as they come in. Or if you just need to pause and breathe and think about what's been said.
So our participant, we are waiting for your reflections in this question. How do you think you and your colleagues are so hard on yourself? Why? So I might just, okay, that's interesting. Muhammad Salah is starting to post his reflection. Depend on personally and trust of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Jane, she has another answer. Overthinking, maybe. Sheena, depends from the previous experience. What do you think? Lack of self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
might be also lack of support.
Mm-hmm.
Most of time, this is due to lack of knowledge that led to that mistake. Mus'ab is showing that we expect more from ourselves, especially that we know that we can do better than our current level.
Mm-hmm.
Farzana also sharing that maybe lack of knowledge. So most of the answers are lack of knowledge. Nadia is sharing her reflection that because it affects other people's life. So
Exactly.
Exactly, lack of smartness. Over expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe lack of critical thinking.
Interesting, yeah.
Sense of responsibility, Osama.
Yeah.
Upskilling.
What was the last one?
Upskilling. This is what you wrote, but I can't rephrase it. Shadia's sharing attitude problem might be. Francis, misunderstanding.
Okay, we'll give it a couple more answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like how everyone is saying it from their own perspective. So we have more to participant, lack of critical thinking again, because it's still all about others' life. So this is really human. Culture or language barrier. Because we think we should be superheroes, know everything, solve every problem. And the last one, a desire for excellence. Aiming so high for excellence.
Yeah.
We don't accept mistakes. And lastly, lack of self-confidence. Not giving respect to each other's opinion. That could be one.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for sharing, and continue to bring that in and think about that. For sure, what you've somebody talked about, or a couple of you talked about, is that because of what you do, you're caring for patients. So when things go wrong, when a mistake happens or an unintended harm, there's big consequences. You could harm a patient could die. So that's you expect more from yourself because of what you do. And that's exactly right. Overthinking and overanalyzing, I think is very relevant as well. You think back and we talk about hindsight bias. So oh, I should have done better. I should have known, where in the circumstances you were so busy, you were caring for 10 patients at the same time, and there was chaos and people coming at you. So there are a lot of circumstances in hindsight where, okay, but why do you why are you so hard on yourselves? Some of you hinted on that desire for excellence, that needing to be superheroes. So remember, shame is not meeting your standards. Well, guess what? Your standards as healthcare workers are very high because of what you do. You never want to harm a patient. You want to care for those patients. So you have a very high standard, to the point where people think of you as superheroes. You have to be perfect. And that's their impression of you. And that's your impression of yourself too. You have very high standards. So that's part of why you're hard on yourself. Because of your profession, you accept nothing less than perfection from yourself. So, and I'm just looking at some of the things. What's interesting to me is that right away I heard in some of the answers that that you are hard on yourselves, that you feel, oh, it was my fault because I didn't have enough knowledge. And maybe that's the case when you're a new student, new worker. But immediately you want to blame yourself. I don't have enough knowledge. It's my attitude that's wrong. So that was surprising to me, and I hope through this you see that it's often not that lack of knowledge. It's often something outside of yourself. So thank you so much for sharing. So I'm just going to review just my thoughts. As I mentioned, the consequences of your actions are significant. It's contrary to your self-identity as a nurse, a pharmacist, a technician. You want to care for the patients. You don't want to harm them. And you have very high expectations of yourself. And this culture of perfection, of being a superhero, a desire for excellence, that and a sense of responsibility, the over expectation somebody talked about. You expect more of yourself and you expect to be perfect. But I hope you understand that this perfection is impossible to achieve. Nobody can be perfect. Things are going to go wrong. Not every error is preventable. And it's not always your fault. So that's the lesson that I wanted you to think about. So how do you go from blaming yourself, from saying, well, I just didn't know enough, I just didn't care enough, I just wasn't paying attention, and I feel so shameful. How do you do that? Well, the first thing you need to think about is self-compassion. Here I'm talking about things you can do for yourself, and there's no I hope that you weren't coming today hoping to have a tool to come away with, okay, this is what we have to do in our organization, this and this and this and this, and everything will be better. No, there's a lot of work to be done by individuals, by the organization. So these are things that you can do as an individual for yourself. And that's self-compassion. So that's giving yourself grace, thinking about what I do when I'm trying to be self-compassionate. I think, how would I be towards somebody who is very ashamed of something they did that caused harm to a patient? I would be compassionate. I would want to, take them, put my arm around them and say, it's okay. I'm here for you. You're not a bad person. You'll get through this. So that self-compassion, you say the same thing to yourself. Self-forgiveness is big. That may take a long time, but work on that, forgiving yourself, because you're not perfect and you shouldn't expect to be perfect. Self-reflection, take a moment to really, once you're through that trauma, that first traumatic experience, take a moment to reflect on yourself as a person and think, okay, what was happening at the time? How was, what was going on around me? How many patients was I taking care of at the time? And was I really in a good space? And also, okay, is there something else the next time this happens? Is there something else I can do to prevent this? And this is down the road, self-reflection. And accept that you are not perfect. And use shame as a learning tool. So we've been talking about this great, big, painful experience. And it's not that you want to avoid shame, because you can use it as a way to learn about yourself, learn about what to do the next time. If you didn't feel shame, there's something wrong with you. I'm sorry if there's people out there who don't feel shame, but really it's a normal emotion, and it's there to help you stop. Like, it's like, what did I do? You stop and you think about what went wrong and what what was your part in this, and what could you do the next time this happens. So there's a reason for shame, and you can use it as a learning tool. So always keep in mind, and this is remember this, if you don't remember anything else, remember that I talked about, you have those exceptionally high standards for yourself. And it's not that you necessarily want to lower those standards, but recognize that as a healthcare worker, you have high standards. So it's easier to feel shame. It's easier to feel guilty. It's easier to feel you don't have that knowledge, because you have to have a lot of knowledge. You have to think on your feet. You have to deal with many, many people at the same time. So you have to have those high standards. So think about that when things go wrong. You are not alone. You saw from your co-participants that everyone is feeling very similar to what you're feeling, but with your own perspective, as Makia said. Seeking help. Healthcare workers, a lot of you think that you can deal with this yourself. You don't need anybody's help. I will do, especially if you're feeling shame and wanting to withdraw. But it's not a weakness to seek help from your colleagues, from your family, maybe from a psychologist, if you have the opportunity, a social worker, somebody who can listen. And we'll talk about how you can support others too. And remember that shame can be a useful emotion. And on this point about shame being useful, this is from Van Vliet, a study she did. A major turning point is reached when you begin to reframe the shame experience in terms of its positive value. So shame can be valuable. When the shame event is perceived as an opportunity for growth and learning, or in the words of participants, as a jumping off board, a stepping stone, an impetus for positive change. So I've been talking a lot, which is why I want to pause here and breathe. This is for me as much as it's for yourself, because I've been giving you a lot of information. And I see that the time is going, but if you have any comments or any questions at this point, you can put them in the chat, or we can just take a moment to breathe. Okay. So maybe save your questions for the end, and hopefully I'll have a few minutes. So now, and the reason I wanted you to breathe is because of this picture. Suddenly, what you might have been thinking too is, well, it's not just me making me feel guilty. On the outside, a lot of people are, I think, judging me, or there's bullying happening. Like, what were you thinking? I can't believe you made that mistake. Blaming. It's all your fault, even though it may not be. And people might avoid you, might start avoiding you. So that mask that we're talking about suddenly begins to erode from the outside too. And the organizational processes, I don't know if you have all of them in your organization, but in organizations you might have a debriefing. When something goes wrong, the team gets together and we say, okay, what went wrong here? And if you feel shame, oh my goodness, if you feel guilty, if you're the one who feels like it's your fault, this meeting, this debriefing can be tremendously difficult. And then you have disclosure. You have to disclose to the patient what went wrong. You might even have if it's a big enough error, a big enough mistake, a big enough harm, then there's this whole incident analysis that goes on. Like, let's look at it from all points of view. And there you are, feeling guilty, feeling it's your fault, and you have to be part of this. I'm not saying those processes are wrong, but it puts you through that error over and over and over again, so that your mask is eroding from the outside. So how do we take that blame culture to a safe, I talked about a psychologically safe culture. And there's no magic wand, magic tool. It's all about individuals and managers and your colleagues that will make it into a safe culture. So on the one hand, in a blame culture, we're looking for individuals to blame. Right away, it's he gave the wrong medication. So that's what went wrong, and that harmed the patient. And okay, let's leave it now. On the other hand, let's consider system reasons. Were there two bottles that looked almost exactly alike, and that's part of the reason things went wrong? Was it the the nurse was the one who gave the medication, but was it mixed in the pharmacy incorrectly? So there might be a lot of other reasons going on. So let's consider the system reasons, and I can talk a little bit more about that if there are questions. So there are organizational processes that target individuals. Okay, let's all get together and figure out who was it that made that mistake. Rather, in a safe culture, you learn from this as a team. You say, okay, this happened. Let's figure out together how this might have been avoided. People abandon and ignore and avoid healthcare workers. Like, we're just going to send that person home and they're going to have to deal with it. Think about what they did. Maybe they fire that individual. Maybe demote that individual. Avoid talking to them. On the other hand, of course, a safe culture, you're going to try to support that healthcare worker, reassure them, help them understand that this happens, this is normal, this is something we know you didn't want this to happen. We know that you're here to care for the patients and something went wrong. Let me see how I can support you. So there's that in a blame culture, there's a culture of silence and denial. Somebody talked about denial after harm. So let's just pretend this never happened. And, the patient was fine after the mistake made, but let's just not talk about it. To openness and transparency at all levels. And I don't just mean the frontline workers, managers, supervisors. You need to be open and transparent. This happened to everyone, but listen, we're here as a team to learn. We're going to support so-and-so. And you know what? This has happened to me too. It could have been me who made this mistake. So let's not blame any one individual. So that openness has to happen at all levels, not just frontline. So what can you do to support others? So remember, I said there's no big magic process. You have to look at yourself as an individual. The organization has to look at how they're dealing with when things go wrong. So what can you do to support others? And I think I've hinted enough out for you to know. Is to invite that person to talk to you and just listen. It's not about talking yourself and talking about all the things that you want to talk about. It's listening to what they have to say. That's the most important thing that you can say. Normalize, say, this happens. It's normal for this to happen. You're still a good nurse. You're still a good director of pharmacy. You're still a good doctor. Explore supports with that person. Look for how they might be supported in the organization through a social worker, or maybe outside the organization there's some resources they can have. and check in regularly. It's not just a one-time, hey, are you okay? I'm here to listen. I'm here to support you. It's the next day, the next week, the next month. Are you okay? Are you still okay? Is there anything I can do? So check in regularly. And that's really important because of what I talked about earlier. And avoid judging what they did. Well, yeah, you could have looked at that note a little more carefully. And that's not what they need to hear at the time. Fixing or saying, okay, let's figure out how we're going to fix it. That's not the time. When you're supporting someone, you're not fixing. And don't minimize. Don't say, oh, no, it's not a big deal. Don't worry. It is a big deal for them. Don't assume that their reactions are what yours would be. Like thinking, oh, if it was me, I'd be crawling into a hole, or, I'd be hiding from everyone. Don't assume that their reactions are what yours would be. And don't be a psychotherapist, unless you are a psychologist out there, supporting colleagues in a professional way. And don't talk too much about yourself. So that's things to avoid. And I'm looking at the time. I was going to show a video. I'll just show a very, very small part of the video, or a minute. And this is about a woman whose mother died because of a medication error. And I just have to take it to the right time.
Providers to ensure that both of us are on a path to healing.
So one of the things that challenged me to move beyond the error was the fact that we were never given the opportunity just to say the simple thing that we were sorry, that it wasn't our intent to harm.
And it was about 2 years later when I had become involved in the Patient Family Safety Council for the Calgary Health Region, and Steve was involved in a Quality Council, and a person that we knew that sat on both councils actually made the overture to bring us together. And we had that meeting, and it was from the very moment that we were both in the same room that it felt complete. It felt like the circle had now come around, and that we were able to sit and talk about what happened and talk about the impact it had on both of us and what we had gone through that was so similar. And following that, they went on to develop 4 safety policies: disclosure after harm, reporting, informing the public, and the just and trusting culture. That marked a huge change of patient safety in the province of Alberta. And because of the national highlight that these events got, it also started to change the conversation nationally about disclosure.
After the error and after credibility was lost, I mean, the one piece that I never had closure on was we never had a chance to say we were sorry. We had caused this great harm. And we know we've done it, and we didn't feel very good about it. It's not, as we've said earlier, we don't show up at work every day to do harm. We show up to hopefully help people and improve things. If you haven't had a medication error or haven't caused harm, it's not because you're an exceptional provider. You've been lucky. Secondly, I guess one of my biggest regrets is that I don't know that I checked in enough on my staff to see how they were doing to ensure they got the support that they needed. And then the third thing I would say is make sure you take care of yourself. Take clues from family, from coworkers, from others, and seek help. I waited far too long before I sought professional help.
I think Mom would be very pleased that she didn't die in vain, that there has been significant...
I'm going to stop there. So I didn't explain that the lady on the right is the daughter of the mother who died of a medication error, and the gentleman, Steve, is the director of pharmacy. So he wasn't the one who gave the wrong medication, but he you can see from his emotions, and this was 5 years later, that he felt responsible for the medication error and for causing the death of this mother of Deborah. So I wanted to share that with you. So you, and I definitely share the link for the whole video, so that you think about also, part of the healing may be that opportunity to talk with the families. And I know there are a lot of legal and confidentiality and privacy things that might keep you from doing that. But, think about that as well. So I'm going to just close with, hopefully, we've talked about the emotions and reactions that are the result of expectations, culture, and the nature of your work. And I think you understood that from the comments that you made. We talked about shame being a powerful and common emotion that can also be useful. And we talked about how you can create a psychologically safe culture through learning, support, openness, and transparency, and strategies to heal, including self-help and support you can give as an organization or as individuals. And the last thing I want to leave with you is the healthcare environment is still, I say, contaminated with myths. The three most significant being that all mistakes are avoidable. That's a myth. Health professionals are perfect. I'm sorry to say, you're not perfect. It's a myth. And mistakes are rare. They're not rare. They happen all the time. So remember, 3 things. Unexpected does not mean preventable. You can't prevent all errors. Mistakes, it doesn't mean you're a failure as a person. Being competent does not mean perfect. You don't have to have all the knowledge. You have to have good knowledge. You have to be competent, but you don't have to be perfect. And I've left very little time for questions. I'm sorry. But I'll that's what I have to say. Akia.
Thank you so much. It was really an informative sessions, and you let our participants to share their feelings with a lot of reflections and reactions. Actually, we have 4 questions, but we will give you the call for answering them all if you could. One question from Nov: what if you get blamed if you shared what happened with others? What do you think? How could she respond to this?
Yeah, so what, in a situation where you're afraid to say because you're going to get blamed, that is, obviously, if you feel that way, you're not in a place where your colleagues share these things and where it's open and transparent. So it's maybe a blame culture. Very difficult. Maybe the first thing you do is share it with someone you trust, a colleague that's very close to you, and talk to them confidentially. So start with that so that maybe they can talk to you about, support you and reassure you that you're not a bad doctor. It's always a good thing to talk about what went wrong, because maybe it can be prevented later on. But I understand where it's very difficult to share this went wrong because you're afraid you're going to be blamed and fired. But start with somebody you trust. And maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your mother or daughter that you start with, just to try to relieve some of that blame so they can help you realize that it's not necessarily your fault.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. As if you are saying that speaking up is part of healing, even if not to our colleagues.
Yeah.
Another question from Sayed Khalid: how many days healing process would take?
Mm-hmm. It can be very long. I think depending on the severity, how bad the harm was, it can take years. I had an interview with a participant who was just crying and sobbing, and it was 20 years after that had happened. So, but it's not that you suffer that much all the way through. You heal little by little, but something will come back to you, and all of a sudden it all comes back to you, and you live it over and over again. But I think giving yourself time to recover, just like any kind of trauma is a trauma that you're going through. You need to give yourself time and be patient about recovering, because it is a slow process. I'm not saying it's going to take 20 years, but maybe as the days go by, a few weeks, few months, it doesn't hurt as much. And especially if you have good support from your colleagues and your organization. I hope that answers that.
That's great. We have also a question from Nadia. How to reflect these feelings on the benefit of patient?
Yeah, how to, and this is why I showed the video. I'm sorry it was so quick at the end. I think, and this is what I'm working on now, is I think it's a good thing. Like when you have a really good friend and you've hurt them, you want to go and say, I'm so sorry I hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt you. And I know legally a lot of people are afraid to say, I made this mistake and you got hurt because of it. A lot of people are afraid that they're going to be sued because of that. I don't know what it's like in your country, but certainly in North America, that's the fear. But if you're going to them, what patients want is just to say, this is, we've never meant to hurt you like this. We never meant for this to happen. We're so sorry that it happened. And you know what? That's what they want to hear. And they want to hear that you're learning from this. And they want to hear that their family member or they themselves were harmed, but you're going to try to prevent that in the future. So it can be very healing to be able to say to that individual, to the family member or the patient, to say, I am so sorry. And they want to hear that it made a difference in your life.
Thank you for this answering. I think we are moving to the last question. Do you recommend tools and resources that can help individuals or organizations to heal from harm that could be embedded within the system?
Yeah, and I can, one thing I can do is share those with the Saudi Patient Safety Center, who could possibly put that up on their website and a link to this video. But yes, there's no one size fits all, one solution, but there is a lot of literature out there about how to become a safer, more psychologically safe culture. I'm thinking of James Reason, Reason, his latest book. I can't think of it right now, of course, but Reason, his latest book is about a lot about healing after harm. That's not a very good answer, but I will share.
Thank you so much. Actually, we took a lot of your time today. Thank you so much, Dr. Diane, for addressing this interesting topic, which really touchy and help a lot of our healthcare participants. And on behalf of Saudi Patient Safety Center, I would like to thank you much for this interesting topic. And I would like also to thank our audience for their active participation. And as part of Saudi Patient Safety Center efforts to provide with timely topics and interesting speakers, we would appreciate if you could just fill the evaluation survey, which was just put in the chat. And thank you for joining us today. We look forward and welcoming you back in the future webinar. Thank you so much.